Hello, friends, and welcome to kindergarten today. Today I'm going to be reading you a story from our Epic app. Let's see. I'm going to sign in as a guest. There we go. We've been reading a lot of Chester stories this week, so I have another Chester story for you with, I believe, our final Chester activity. Here it is. This story is called Chester the Brave, written by Audrey Penn and illustrated by Barbara L. Gibson. So the title is the name of the book, and it tells us what the story is about. The author writes the story, and the illustrator draws the pictures. Okay, so here we go, Chester the Brave. Chester Raccoon sat snuggled in his mother's lap. The last golden rays of sundown shone through their tree hole. Shone through their tree hole. And his younger brother Ronnie I can't read, oh my goodness. And his younger brother Ronnie still lay curled up, fast asleep on the far side of their hollow. My apologies for that very challenging sentence. "This is my very best time," Chester told his mother, lifting his eyes to hers. "This is my very best time, too," she told him sweetly. "Do you still want me to tell you about the little robin?" "Yes, please." Well, Mrs. Raccoon began her story. The little robin stepped up to the edge of the nest, bent his little legs, lifted his tiny wings, and said, "I can't, I'm too afraid," and hopped back into the safety of his nest. "He was too afraid to fly?" asked Chester. "Yes, he was," answered Mrs. Raccoon. Chester looked very worried. He drooped his head and stuck out his lower lip. Did the little robin think it was okay to be afraid? "He thought it meant he wasn't brave," explained Chester's mother. "You see, the little robin's brother and sister flew their very first time, and he thought that meant they were very brave. And if they were very brave, he thought it meant he wasn't." Chester appeared upset. "Was he right?" he asked his mother. Mrs. Raccoon smoothed out the fur on the top of Chester's head. "Well," she told him, "the little robin's father explained that his brother and sister weren't brave. They simply weren't bothered." Chester lifted his head and peered up at his mother. "What does that mean?" Miss Raccoon laughed. The little robin wasn't sure what it meant either, so his father asked him if he was bothered when he was eating worms. "Oh, yuck!" screeched Chester. "That's disgusting. What did he say?" "He said he wasn't bothered eating worms at all. He said he loved eating worms, especially the big, long, thick, stretchy kind." "Oh, blech!" bleated Chester. His nose and mouth twisted and squished together, and his entire body shuddered. "Eating worms would bother me." Mrs. Raccoon nodded. "It would bother me too," she confessed. Then the little robin's father asked him if he was bothered when he was singing, and the little birdie began tweeting, and he said he wasn't bothered when he was singing at all. "Singing is a lot better than eating worms," grimaced Chester. "I agree," said Mrs. Raccoon. Then the little bird's father told him that being brave wasn't about flying when he wasn't afraid to fly. Being brave was about flying when he was afraid to fly, but found the courage to fly anyway because he knew he must. Then his father asked him if he was bothered when he was reciting his flying lessons in front of all the other little birdies who nested in our tree. The poor little robin got all flustered. He hopped up and down and flapped his wings just like the time the skunk sprayed our tree from down below. The little robin said that reciting his lessons in front of all the other little birds was the worst thing he ever had to do in his whole life. Suddenly, Chester began to tremble, and he nestled deeper into his mother's soft, comforting arms. "Oh my," Mrs. Raccoon replied softly. "What's the matter, Chester? Is something wrong?" Chester nodded. "Reciting lessons in front of the other animals at Owl Teacher's school is the worst thing I ever have to do in my whole life, too," he whimpered. "Is that so?" Mrs. Raccoon gave Chester a reassuring hug and then took his tiny hand in hers and gently kissed the center of his palm. "Shall I tell you what happened to the little robin, or would you rather jump on top of Ronnie and wake him up for school?" Chester giggled. "I want to know what happened to the robin." Well, the very next day, the little robin's mother tucked one of her own tiny flight feathers into his wing and told him it was for good luck. So even though the little robin was still bothered about reciting his lessons, he stood in front of all the other birdies in our tree and tweeted, "I lift my head to the clouds, I push off with my feet, I flap my wings, and I let the gentle breeze take me for a ride." And then you see the bird and he's going, "Gulp." It's like when you're nervous, you know. And while he was still afraid to fly, he found the courage he needed and said to himself, "I am very brave." Then he stepped up to the edge of his nest, spread his wings, pushed off with his feet, and away he flew. After all, he was a very brave little robin. "Hooray!" clapped Chester. "Do you know what I think being brave is?" Chester's mother asked him. Chester shook his head. "I think being brave is about 3 little words: think, tell, and do. If you think you can't, tell yourself you can, then do it." I like that. Mrs. Raccoon lifted Chester's hand. "Do you see that kiss in your palm?" Chester laughed. "No." "Well, it's there, and it's for luck, just like the robin's little feather." Look at his baby brother sleeping. Look at his legs up in the air. That's how my dog Bentley sleeps. A silly little raccoon. Chester stared at his palm and then jumped off his mother's lap, bent his knees, opened his arms, and yelled, "I am very brave." Then he ran to the other side of the hollow and with a flying leap landed on top of his brother. "Wake up, Ronnie! It's time for school." Chester the Brave has to make a speech. Later that night, Chester Raccoon stood on a branch at Owl Tree's... Can't talk. Later that night, Chester Raccoon stood on a branch at Owl Teacher's school tree. There we go. He thought to himself, "If I think I can't, I tell myself, and I can't, and I do it." And he found all the courage he needed to tell himself, "I am very brave." Then he opened his hand, and there in the middle of his palm was his mother's gentle, caring kiss for good luck. And even though Chester was still the tiniest bit afraid, he recited his lesson in front of all the other animals that attended Owl Teacher's school tree. After all, Chester is a very brave little raccoon. Yay! We did it. Whoa. Well, thank you for listening to this story. I'm going to show you what we're about to do next. Whoops.